Intrusive thoughts. Why do we get intrusive thoughts? Well, let me use an analogy. Have you ever stood on a balcony or on a high point or a bridge, like an overlook, where there's a big drop and a railing or a guardrail or whatever? Have you ever stood on a point like that? Or maybe on a dock at night or on a fishing pier, and ever gotten the thought or the urge of climbing on the railing or jumping off? I know I have, and I experienced that back when I didn't have many problems, that I've struggled with lately. So, why do we experience that? And what it is we're curious. We're almost curious about the catastrophic effect that it could have. If I climb on this railing, how are the people around me going to react? I'm curious to see what the reaction is going to be. There is this attraction almost to the thing that we're afraid of. And it's only when you're afraid of it. Because if you weren't afraid of it, you don't get that, all right? It's, if you're acrophobic, if you're afraid of heights and you're standing on that point that's high, you're going to experience that especially so, because you're afraid of it. The more afraid of it you are, the more you get the urge, the more you get the thought. Now the thing is, when you're standing on the high point, it's very easy to verify to yourself that what you fear is not occurring. When you get the thought and the urge of climbing on the railing and jumping off, that's going to trigger anxiety. And then at one point, if the anxiety is strong enough, especially when you're looking out at the view and you see the steep drop, you might start to question your own intentions. You might start to doubt yourself. You might start to believe that, I might actually follow through on that urge. You're going to be afraid of yourself. And so you'll probably stand back or run away back and avoid the whole thing, because you won't be able to trust yourself. However, even in that situation, it is very easy for you to verify to yourself that what you're afraid of is not happening. It's very easy to verify that to yourself. Why? Because what are you afraid of? You're afraid of falling down. Well, so long as you're standing on that balcony, what you're afraid of happening ain't happening. You're not falling down, so that's not a problem. But when it's something that you cannot verify explicitly and with certainty, then the anxiety stretches out. It stretches out, and it becomes much, much more subversive. So, and then that's what makes the problem tend to linger. Because let's just say that you're getting an intrusive thought that said, while you were driving, that bump on the road, or not the bump, let's say you get an intrusive thought that's something that you can't really prove. It's more intangible. Because the more tangible it is, the easier it is to verify, the less it's going to stretch. The more intangible it is, the more it stretches. So let's say you get an intrusive thought that's sexual in nature, or something that is about the future. All right, maybe it is so-and-so is going to happen by touching this thing a certain number of times, or if you don't touch this again, so-and-so is going to happen to so-and-so, or to your mother, or to whoever. You see, in a situation like that, it's intangible. It might be irrational, who cares? It's intangible. So now you're standing on the balcony, all right? The overlook, the drop down is the thought, this is going to happen, it's the future. Right, that is the feared situation, the thing that you're afraid of. That is the drop. But the thing is, it's intangible, so you can't prove, you can't verify, well, you know what? I'm not falling down. You don't know. So because of that, it just stretches out. And you end up in a situation where you're continuously trying to figure out, trying to verify the unverifiable. And that's what ends up getting you in a loop of rumination. So that is where the intrusive thoughts come from. And I would say that there's two different kinds of intrusive thoughts. Not that they're fundamentally much different, but they're different in the sense of the kind of experience that they give you. I classify them as the following: classical intrusive thoughts and viral intrusive thoughts. Well, classical intrusive thoughts, those are the intrusive thoughts where you're worried about something. So you're worried about some uncertainty about the future. You're worried about, for instance, if you had run over someone's cat while you were driving home. That is a classical intrusive thought. Intrusive thoughts that tell you, if you do blah, 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 so-and-so is going to happen. If you're at the gym lifting weights and then you're trying to do 10 rounds of 20 pounds on your right arm and then the same thing on your left arm, your mind says, if you don't do 25, blah, blah, blah is going to happen. Or if you don't do 15, and blah, blah, blah is going to happen. That's a classical intrusive thought. It gives you a lot of anxiety, but once the anxiety goes away, then it tends to go away as well. It's there with the feeling itself. A viral intrusive thought is something that it's more related to trauma. I mean, both of them can be related to trauma, but the viral intrusive thought is, I call it that because the experience that you have with it is very much like the stages of getting sick and then recovering from, for instance, a cold or a flu. So let's say that you suffered some kind of sexual trauma in the past, all right? And there is something that reminds you of that. Something reminds you of that. Might be very subtle, but it's something that reminds you of that. When you get triggered, all right? If you're not triggered, you're okay. But when you get triggered, the thing reminds you of that. Then if you try to engage in sexual activity, you're going to start getting these intrusive thoughts. You're going to start getting intrusive thoughts they'll start to worsen and worsen until they peak. And then they start to taper down and slowly taper down until they wither away. So you have the triggering, that's the point of contraction. And then what happens is, as you start to try to engage in sexual activity or think sexually or whatever, then you start getting more of these thoughts. They start arriving, and then even when you're not thinking sexually, you're still getting these thoughts. You're still getting them. And that's where it peaks. That's the point in having a flu or a cold, when you got a fever and you've got complete loss of appetite or whatever. That's the point where you've peaked. That's like vomiting with a stomach virus. That's the point where you have reached your max. And then it slowly starts to taper down. And when it tapers down, it doesn't go linearly. It goes down and goes up a little, then down and up a little. Some times of day are better than other times of day. Usually in the morning you feel better than at night. Maybe for you, you might feel better at night than in the morning. You know, it all depends on what happens. And the thing that you can do about a viral intrusive thought is, it's not about anxiety. Like, you might not be anxious. You might feel perfectly relaxed, but you're still getting those thoughts. You know, whereas the other ones, once you relax, you relax. Viral intrusive thoughts, you'll still get the thoughts. Just like, the virus. You can overcome the virus. You'll still be coughing. You might still have congestion. The thing is, what you can do with viral intrusive thoughts is you just give it time. And your mind, like your body was a virus, will naturally do away with it. What you can do is you can douse it. You can go and engage in different experiences. You can try to meditate, or you can try to do stuff that suppresses some of the symptoms and makes it easier to deal with. And you can disengage from activities that require you to be healthy enough to engage in them. Like if you're sick, you don't go swimming. In this case, if you got the thoughts, then maybe you don't have any sex, you don't masturbate. But over time, this shit goes away. Unless, of course, you get re-triggered. And then that itself is something that, either you eliminate the source or you find a way to conquer it. One of two things would have to happen. But it's a different experience. Now, why do you get viral intrusive thoughts? I think that there is two forms of anxiety. I think that there is conscious anxiety and subconscious anxiety. And I'm going to use energy as an analogy for that. Energy comes in either direct form or potential, like mechanical energy. There is mechanical energy, or there's mechanical potential energy. All right, radiative energy, there's potential energy. All right, chemical energy, chemical potential energy. So potential energy is like, or a kinetic energy, kinetic potential energy. So let's say that I'm holding a ball, or let's say a ball is being held by a string and it's dangling down. That ball is in a state of potential energy, because if the string is cut, then it's going to accelerate downwards. It's in a state of potential energy. Whereas when it accelerates downwards and impacts the ground, that is kinetic energy. So in the case of your mind, you have conscious anxiety, which is what you experience in your chest. It's what makes your heart rate increase. It's what makes you, it's what makes you breathe more quickly. It's what makes you start searching on Google for symptoms or whatever. You have conscious anxiety. That's where you're worried about something. And then you have subconscious anxiety, which is potential anxiety. All right, it's potential anxiety. It's anxiety, but it exists in the subconscious. And it's only when you do something that, that activates it in some form or fashion, or affects it in some form or fashion, that it does in subtle ways emit itself in a direct form. All right. So basically, in other words, the intrusive thoughts that you get when they're viral, when you're getting intrusive thoughts, you hate the thoughts, you don't want the thoughts, they cause you distress, but you're not really feeling anxious. You're feeling relaxed, but you just can't do stuff that you want to do because you still get those thoughts anyway. That is coming from the subconscious. That is the mental version of potential energy. And so the solution to that is you have to be totally relaxed. What often happens is when I wake up in the morning, I find myself having a lot less, just not only anxiety, even the viral thoughts, there's a lot less of them. When I wake up in the morning, for that brief time when I'm just kind of getting into my senses and stuff, there's a lot less of them, or none of them at all. And that's the reason why, is because sleep relaxes the mind entirely. It relaxes the mind entirely. You have to be totally relaxed, not just breathing, not just not just dealing with like the surface level anxiety. You got to be totally relaxed as well. Subconsciously, you have to be relaxed, and the way that you relax your subconscious is by getting deep sleep. It's by meditation's another thing that you can do. I would say having a healthy routine. You got to have a very healthy routine, and that over time relaxes the subconscious. All right, so That means you're engaged in good activities, right? You're engaged in good activities. You have an organized schedule that you go by, and you socialize with people. If you have a good social life, that's definitely very helpful. Sleep, obviously, very important. I mean, I wouldn't say that diet is so much important, although I will say if you eat unhealthy, you will have less energy in general. But doing things to relax, or going to a quiet place, sitting still, you have to set your mind to ease. Because a lot of this stuff comes from the fact that we are sensory overloaded. We are constantly engaged and constantly worried and stressed about this and stressed about that and stressed about that, because our life is very fast paced, and technology doesn't help because you're always on your phone. You're getting instant stimulation, instant pleasure that you're getting from, for instance, YouTube videos, to the point that if you were to take most people and make them sit in a room by themselves without their phone, they're going to feel anxious. All right? They're going to feel restless. Maybe not some more than others, but even people who are neurotypical without anxiety problems, they'll still have some anxiety. And the reason why is because that's the general state of anxiety that society has. Right? That's the general state of anxiety of society. That's why very fast-paced societies that may be very rich and developed have a lot more mental problems than places that are a lot slower. Poor countries oftentimes have better mental health, and has better mental health because the general anxiety that exists is lower. Since the cost of living is lower, life is a lot simpler, it's a lot less complicated, you have a lot less distraction, you have a lot less sensory overload. It makes it simpler. Doesn't mean it doesn't exist, but it just exists less because it's a simpler state of being. So a lot of that shit also comes from the fact that we have that general state of anxiety. But if you can relax yourself in totality, and it's not something that you can do because you're seeking the result. You just have to be engaged in the process of really relaxing yourself. When you're fully relaxed, consciously, subconsciously, you won't get any intrusive thoughts in any situation that may otherwise have caused you that. The way I know that is when I'm totally relaxed. It might take days for me to get to that point. When I'm totally relaxed, consciously and subconsciously, if I am doing something that would otherwise bring about intrusive thoughts, like maybe, for instance, touching a part of my face, like my eyelashes, and that's often because of the superstition around making a wish with them. I often get intrusive thoughts when I do that. I won't get any of them. If I'm engaging in an activity where I'd get a lot of those viral type of intrusive thoughts, none of them occur. And if they do come, I can actually think about them and observe them from a distance. I'm not afraid of it. And I can observe it from a distance and dismiss of that. So you have to achieve that state of total relaxation, and in order to do that, you got to have a healthy lifestyle, be organized, but at the same time you have to go and set your mind at ease. Maybe go somewhere alone that's quiet and just sit there and listen to the environment. You cannot you can't be seeking results. All right, that's not the way, because oftentimes the way that we go about treatment is neurotic. We're like, all right, how can I get this result so I can get to blah, 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 and get so-and-so outcome. That's not the way that it works. It's a process of being able to rid yourself of that anxiety, because life is always bringing you more of that shit. And then the other thing I would say is, if there is something that is bringing about that stuff, maybe you're traumatized in some fashion, and there's something that reminds you of that, I would say that cutting the thing that reminds you of that out for a while is a good way to bring that all down. Because, you know, a lot of times when we suffer from problems, for example, let's say you suffered sexual trauma, and then that might cause, let's say if you're a guy, let's say that causes you erectile dysfunction. Because that is oftentimes caused by sexual trauma. Let's say somebody was raped or molested or something happened to you, all right? Or maybe it was something, you know, that's seemingly unrelated, but it just got associated in some form or fashion. The way in which, you know, in that situation, the natural state, the natural tendency that you would normally have, that is the sun. And whether you get a boner or not, that's the planets, that's the asteroid belt, that's the Oort cloud, that's all the masses going around the sun. And then the trigger is a rogue planet entering the solar system that throws all the orbits out of whack. And that's what makes it such that you are not able to get such a, you know, you're not able, for instance, if you're a guy, to get an erection because of getting triggered. You know, you have a rogue planet, it enters, it triggers it. Another one enters, triggers, and it throws everything out of whack. But let's just say that you cut that shit out. Over time, because the sun is a point of great gravitational influence, eventually everything will find its place. Eventually everything finds its niche around the sun. You know, nature, when we're not separate of nature, will always tend towards equilibrium. That's in physics, right? It always tends towards equilibrium, no matter whether it is physical, right, or it is psychological and emotional. It always tends towards equilibrium. In an ecosystem, if you introduce an invasive species into there, eventually after enough time, even if some species go extinct, eventually balance is going to be, and order is going to be restored. The same thing is true in a solar system. If the Milky Way and Andromeda collide with each other, eventually balance will be restored. You might have chaos for 1,000,000 years, but balance will be restored. And the same thing is true in our minds. If we get stressed out by something, you just give it time, eventually balance is restored, all right? You just have to give it time. We can't be searching for the result. You give it time and the result will come, all right? But all that shit can be overcome. Whatever you're dealing with right now, if you're watching this video, whatever problem that you have that's trying to get in the way of your life is not you, and you are not it. You are experiencing it. But you will overcome this. You can overcome this.